All right, we're looking at day 3 of our topic 6 notes. We're talking today about parallelograms. Well, I guess actually when we start off today, we're going to be talking about general quadrilaterals. All right, so quadrilateral, of course, that just means it is a shape with 4 sides, and any old random number, any old random length of sides, and any random size of angles. As long as it has 4 sides and 4 angles, it could be considered a quadrilateral. What we're going to look at for the next two sections of notes is some specific kinds of quadrilateral, some ways that we can categorize different 4-sided shapes. All right, this first one on top is a trapezoid. The next one is a kite, and this last one is what's called a parallelogram. And parallelograms are going to be what we talk about today on this video. And then the next video, the next section of notes is going to be about trapezoids and kites. All right, so the subcategory that we're looking at today is parallelograms. And there's a few things that make a quadrilateral. These are the things that define whether or not a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. First of all, if it's a parallelogram, it's a shape that has opposite sides that are parallel. On your printout, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on right here, but on this picture, hopefully you can see it a little clearer. On your top and bottom of this shape, there's 2 arrows pointing that way. And on the left and right side of the shape, there's 2 arrows pointing up that way. And that tells us that those are the sides that are parallel to each other. So when we talk about opposite sides, we're talking about sides of the shape that are not connected. Those opposite sides are parallel to each other on a parallelogram. That's actually where the name comes from. So the rest of these 4 things, everything else that has to do with parallelograms is because of those parallel sides. All right, the next thing is that opposite sides are congruent. And that's our little congruent symbol right there, the equal sign with an enye up on top of it, that little squiggle on top of it. So you can see, hopefully a little clearer on this picture than on your printout, you can see the 2 congruence marks on the top and 2 on the bottom. We've got 1 congruent mark on the left side and 1 on the right side. And that just means they are the same length, just like every other congruence marker we've ever had. Up next, our next property is that opposite angles are congruent. So you can see right here we've got angle congruence markers, those little arcs on the inside of it. Your top left and bottom right both have 2. The top right, bottom left both have 1 marker. And that shows that they are congruent to each other. Okay, so we've got opposite sides and opposite angles that are congruent. Up next is that consecutive angles are supplementary. Remember that word, supplementary. Key word right there. We've used that word time and time again this whole semester. It says if angles are supplementary, that means they add up to 180 degrees. So when we talk about consecutive angles, that's talking about the ones that are right next to each other. Okay, opposite angles are the ones that are across and they don't have any sides in common, the ones like those. But consecutive angles are the ones that do have a side in common. So I'm talking about like both of the ones on the top right here. This one plus this one would add up to 180. Both of the ones on the left, this angle plus this angle, would add up to 180. Okay, so consecutive angles, the ones next to each other, are supplementary. Our last thing is this. It says that diagonals bisect each other. Okay, diagonals are those lines that connect from corner to corner on your quadrilateral. So when you connect angle to angle across the middle of your quadrilateral, if you do that both times, that point where they cross in the middle is actually the middle. It is the true middle, the midpoint of both of those diagonal lines. All right, so we've got congruence marks, one right there and right there, that show that they're congruent, and we've got 2 marks right here and 2 marks right here to show that they are congruent also. All right, going on next. So all of that is what has to do with parallelograms. On your canvas, there are some problems that will require you to keep track of which sides are congruent with each other. There are some problems that will ask you about congruent angles, and you're going to have to remember which angle, what that means if they're congruent. So if they're congruent, you would set up an equation where one thing is equal to the other thing. If the angles are supplementary because they're consecutive angles, that means you've got to have one angle plus the other one equals 180. So that's two different equations. You have to be able to recognize which is which. Going on now to the next page, we talked about before, big picture. These are three ways that you can categorize quadrilaterals. Quadrilateral is just any old four-sided shape, and these are three subcategories you can put it into. Well, parallelograms, that category of parallelograms have some subcategories also. The first one is a category of rectangles. The second one is a rhombus. All right. A parallelogram, if you wanted to get more specific, could be a rectangle or a rhombus. So let's look at what that means. First off, both a rectangle and a rhombus have all the same properties as any other parallelogram. All right. Rectangle and rhombus are subcategories. So that means it still fits. It still is a parallelogram, but it's just got extra stuff also attached to it. So everything from this page right here also applies to a rectangle or a rhombus. Okay, the next thing on a rectangle, this is something you already know. All of the angles, all four angles, are right angles. The last thing is that on a rectangle, all of the diagonals are congruent. So connecting corner to corner, connecting corner B to corner D, or connecting angle A to C, those two diagonal lines are the same length. All right. So pretty much, if you want to summarize all that, a rectangle is just a parallelogram with all right angles. Okay, that's the important part that sticks out about rectangles. The next thing is a rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram where all four sides are congruent. So on a regular parallelogram, we said that opposite sides are always congruent. Okay, the sides that aren't touching each other are always congruent. Well, on a rhombus, it's not just the opposite ones; it's all four of them are all congruent to each other. The last two things on a rhombus is about the diagonals. The first says that a rhombus has perpendicular diagonals, and that did not print off very well on your sheet. So make sure you draw in, and you can tell that that's supposed to be the little square down in the corner. That means it's a perpendicular right angle. Okay? Those diagonals, when you connect corner to corner, it makes a right angle in the middle. And the last thing is this: the diagonals also bisect the opposite angles. So again, we're talking about the diagonals. So we're connecting corner to corner on this rhombus. And what that does is it splits the angles in half as well. When you connect corner to corner, it splits the angles in half. All right, going on next, there's a third subcategory of parallelogram that actually kind of fits. It fits into both the definition of a rectangle and the definition of a rhombus. Okay, think about that for a second. If you have a shape that has four right angles, like a rectangle, and it's got four congruent sides, like a rhombus, you already know what that shape is. It's a square. We got four right angles, and we got four congruent sides all the way around that square. All right, so a square, that just means it has the properties of a rectangle and a rhombus. All right, so it's a parallelogram. It's got all of that stuff from the first page, but it also has the four right angles of a rectangle. It has the four congruent sides like a rhombus. So that's what's going on with our parallelograms, okay? The next notes section is going to be talking more about the other kinds of quadrilaterals. But I want to take a second right now and look at some quick examples and just give you just little hints about what to do on the Canvas problems for this one. Okay, on this problem right here, we know that first off, up at the top, it says this in your Canvas, and it says it right here that all of these pictures are all parallelograms. Okay, all of them are parallelograms, and that tells us that we have to use some of these properties. First off, if we have a side right here, QR that's 11, PS has to be the same thing. Okay, we already said on a parallelogram, way back over here, we already said that opposite sides are congruent. Okay, that's how we know that if one side is 11, the other side has to also be 11. Come on over to this one. This problem right here, these two angles are consecutive angles. And on a parallelogram, we said consecutive angles are supplementary. Okay? There are several questions like that where you have to find the missing side measurement. Some like this where you have to find the missing angle measurement. On a problem like this, you don't have consecutive angles. Okay, consecutive would mean it was right next to it. Well, this angle that's given and this angle that it's asking for are opposite angles. And on a parallelogram, opposites are congruent, not supplementary. There are some problems like that where you're looking for the missing measurement, but there are some like this also where it wants you to solve for x. Okay, so you have to know on these two opposite ones, they're congruent to each other. But on these two consecutive ones, this plus this equals 180. All right. Up next, there are a few problems where it gives you stuff in x, but even though it gives you all that with x, it's asking about the angle. Okay, so pay attention on a problem like this. So even though you found x, you're not necessarily finished until you plug it back in down here. All right. It says it on the canvas, and I'm going to emphasize it one last time, and then we'll be done. Make sure you are answering the question that's being asked. Do not read through and fly through those problems so quickly that you're not paying attention to what the question is asking for. There are some students that use up every attempt on their online assignment because they were clicking the answer to the wrong question. They were clicking the answer to the one that they thought was right because they weren't reading what the question was asking for. Okay? So make sure you know what you're looking for before you click submit on that assignment. All right, that's all we got for this section. Y'all have a good one.